Earlier, I shared a story about walking through Harvard Square as an undergraduate and judging every single, well, it seemed like almost every single person's attire. And I'd like to return to that story, one specific part of it. So it actually happened to be the middle of winter in Cambridge, and there was a lot of slushy snow, and the sidewalks were really messy. And I had just recently bought some amazing outdoor boots, winter boots from Columbia, and I was so happy with them. They were 200-gram Thinsulite, and my feet were so toasty. And I was walking along practically like a 6-year-old, stomping in the puddles, thinking, ha ha, I laugh at you, snow. Ha ha, I laugh at you, freezing slush. And was so very pleased with myself. And at that moment, I was looking down at a puddle and noticed somebody coming in the opposite direction wearing some cute little slides, almost like slipper shoes. And she didn't happen to even be wearing any socks. And she was sort of delicately dancing among the puddles and avoiding the slush and walking through Harvard Square. And I thought to myself, what an idiot. Like, don't they know it's winter? What are you thinking? It wasn't till a couple days later that I was reflecting on this and I thought, wow, I bet she was just as pleased with herself and her shoes as I was. I bet her standard was something like, I love having really cute new slides. I bet all the other gals wish they had slides as cute as mine. And she was totally happy and didn't mind the fact that she had to avoid all the slushy puddles. This got me thinking about the fact that things that I assume are right, and then I run up the ladder of inference and think the other person is an idiot because they don't understand the value of nice, toasty, Thinsulite boots, that I am being quite blind to what are their values. And that although I'm not friends with that person I saw in Harvard Square, we don't have a relationship, the fact that we have different standards on shoes may not matter at all. It did trigger this curiosity in me about what the heck is going on with other people's standards. Welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph, an organizational behavior scholar interested in how we interact with ourselves, with others, and build learning cultures in healthcare organizations. This week, we're going to be looking at other people's standards. We've taken a look at the fact that we judge quite naturally, we complain quite naturally. We examined the fact that our complaints and our judgments often come from hidden standards that we're not even aware of, values that we hold that drive those judgments. And then we looked at the fact that when our values or standards are disregarded, we can have really strong emotional reactions to that. So this week, we're going to be pivoting and thinking about those moments of strong reaction, those moments of judgment, or perhaps moments of conflict with somebody else, and using that as a portal to get curious about what is their standard in the moment. What are they focused on? So what we want to get you ready for this week is when there's a conflict, when you get into it with someone else because you think you should zig and they appear to be thinking that the needed thing is zagging, to get curious about their standard. So when there's conflict, get curious about their standard. The readiness goal we have here is that conflict could be a tripwire for you to wonder, what is the other person holding on to so dearly that I can't see? As my colleague Laura Rock says, what don't I know here? Let's connect this topic of other people's standards, which sounds kind of dry and unemotional, back into our feelings. Last week, we talked about how when somebody does something unexpected or doesn't meet your standard, for example, you're the attending doctor and your resident doesn't call you with an important lab value, You can feel angry, you can feel ashamed, you can feel betrayed. These unexpectedly strong emotions really ambush us, I think, often. They're stronger than we expect. And we talked last week about the fact that those strong emotions can come from the fact that it's an identity threat of some sort. I'm not going to be a good doctor if I don't have the lab values I need to safely manage this patient. Also, sometimes have really strong emotions related to when our values are disregarded because of some history. Maybe they were disregarded in some very painful way in our past, and we've forgotten about that, but it comes up, rears its head unexpectedly in the moment. This week, what we want to talk about is that we interpret the standard as being disregarded, not only as about the standard, but I have been disregarded. You are disrespecting me by not meeting the standard that I hold, but you might not know. I feel aggrieved. I feel done wrong by. And how do we deal with that? So let's explore how this comes about. How do we get ourselves into this situation where we feel so ambushed by other people's actions? There's a concept called the false consensus effect that was discovered by Lee Ross, the same guy who brought us the fundamental attribution error. And the false consensus effect is this idea that I have an assumption, I have a value in this case, and I assume that you share it. And this has been researched over and over again in the 45, 50 years since he did that work. And we still seem to fall into this trap as humans. So why this is important is that when I'm interacting with you, I'm falsely assuming or wrongly assuming that you already hold the same value that I do or hold the same standard that I do. So let's go back to our story of the attending doctor and her resident. The doctor asked the resident to call if the hematocrit became, in her view, critically low. The resident didn't call. The attending was furious. The attending might have thought, ungenerously, as I sometimes do, are you an idiot? And she might have wrongly assumed that the resident held the same standard or value that she did, which is it's best if we address this low hematocrit early so that we have more options and this patient doesn't deteriorate in a way that makes it much more difficult or impossible for us to help them. The resident might have a completely different value that the attending doctor is unaware of, which is unless this value is really critically low, I'm not going to call my attending because I don't want to wake her up and I don't want to be seen as somebody who's crying wolf or can't manage the situation by myself. For right now, we're not going to worry about how to bridge the gap between these values. But we do want to focus on the idea that when somebody does something that you feel harms you, often their intention is benign. They have a different value than you do. The impact may be painful for you, but their intention is benign. How do we feel so ambushed by the fact that other people hold different values or don't meet our own values or standards? The false consensus effect, that's one part of it. The other thing that makes this so intense is explained by Amy Edmondson and Diana McLean Smith in their paper, Too Hot to Handle. And what they talk about is once we realize we have really different values, that itself may escalate the situation because I might feel unpleasantly surprised at the very least, or betrayed by the fact that I thought you understood the importance of calling me with a critical lab value, and I learn that you don't. And it's not only that you didn't call me, but now I've learned that you have a different value than I do, and that's upsetting in and of itself. So this week's workout of the week. Think back to your judgments from week one, or just some judgments you've had this week, or complaints you've had about another person. What was the other person doing that made no sense by your standards? So whatever your judgment of them is, why in the world are they wearing little slides in the middle of Harvard Square in the winter? Why in the world didn't they call me with that critical lab value? Use that to get curious about what might have been their standard in the moment. Why did their actions make sense to them? What was the value they were holding? So the exercise is when you have a judgment, when you have a complaint about someone else, speculate, guess, invent a frame that might explain what makes their action make perfect sense. What is the standard and value that they are holding? So implicit in this explanation is not going to be what many of us initially do, which is make an ungenerous inference and assume their actions make sense because they're an idiot. Instead, there's some interesting value or standard they hold that makes their actions make perfect sense. I send you off and I send myself off this week with the invitation to please feel free to email me at curiousnow@harvardmedsim.org, or please post to our alumni network on LinkedIn. Get curious about other people's standards.
Hey there, once again, this is James. We're going to be back with a couple of our sim experts this week. If you are interested in potentially talking to us on Curious Now about your experience with these exercises, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free, if you're interested, to email us at curiousnow@harvardmedsim.org. And once again, here's Jenny Rudolph.
Welcome back to Curious Now. Last week, talked with Laura Klinke-Borgman and Colleen Donovan. Laura and Colleen, we talked judging and mental noting of our judging. And then last week, we talked about what are the standards behind those judgments that are kind of like the propellant that makes us judge. And this week, we're going to talk some more, I think, about propellant. Often when we have judgments and standards we really care about, they come with a heavy cargo or a powerful cargo of emotions. I'd love to start with hearing about what was it like for you to start monitoring those emotions, or how did you relate to them as you started trying to tune into those?
It's a tricky exercise, especially when you're trying to kind of do it in the moment. I do appreciate that effort, though. It is like a skill, right? You have to practice it in order to get good at it. I guess one of the other times that I recognized this was I had a nurse come out of a room to tell me about a patient who she was concerned was there for narcotic medication. And she communicated to me, she's like, be careful with this one. I think they're looking for narcotics. Like, I hadn't even seen the patient yet. The judgment that came up while I was working was this person wants something from me that I maybe am not willing to give. And that makes me a little frustrated and angry. Are they going to try to manipulate me into doing something I don't want to do? But then mental noting and then calling it out for the frustration and anger that it was. And then realizing that I hadn't even met that person yet, that maybe I was bringing biases now into that patient encounter. And that's not good for either of us. I had to like recenter myself before going into that room and be like, okay, I have that piece of information, but the way I'm perceiving it right now may not be true.
You know what I think about immediately when I hear that story, Colleen, is the type of thing that you must have to do to avoid prematurely closing on a diagnosis. But in this case, it's almost, it's an assessment of the person more broadly. So the emotion seemed like it informed you, but it didn't overwhelm you. Stepping back a little bit.
I think that that's correct, but I had to think about it first. I had to make sure that I didn't, because I like once again felt that tightness in my body of like somebody's trying to take advantage of me. And then I had to be like, oh, that's a strong reaction. Let me be aware of that and know that I actually can control that now that I know about it. And let me go into this room with that piece of information off on the side, but I can do what I want with that information. I am not controlled by it.
As we kind of think about this together, one of the things that fascinates me about strong emotions when I experience them is I feel this dilemma, which is, on the one hand, I feel like those emotions are truly me, like that's my authentic reaction, damn it. But then I also feel like, it's kind of a triggered reaction often. And whatever is authentically me, like there's a better me that doesn't include that snarl. And I struggle kind of with like being real and being a person who can connect. Anyway, I'm wondering if any of
Yes.
that resonates with you, and what was your journey like?
Yes, 100%. I think I very commonly experience exactly what you just described, Jenny, of this almost like dichotomy of my emotion, right? It's that initial authentic reaction and then almost an immediate I can do better or maybe I should have done better, And so I think honestly, to your point, I think that sometimes can actually then strengthen and embolden my emotional response because now it's like I'm torn. One second I'm thinking, my gosh, what in the world were they thinking? And then literally the next moment I'm like, what did I do wrong to make that happen? And then sometimes can actually just ignite the physical reaction, the tightness, the feeling it in my body. I literally have two voices sitting on my shoulder fighting each other at that moment. And so I think, these exercises have helped me at least realize that and be able to even just say that, what I just said. And again, just calling it out and naming it allows me then to decide how I will actually approach it and decide how I will, best address it.
Hmm. So one of the things I thought of when you were talking about that intensification of the two voices was the concept from the book Difficult Conversations, where they talk about a difficult situation often triggers our identity issues. And when I was listening to you, Laura, I was thinking a conscientious, compassionate, intelligent educator is struggling to make sense of why her students didn't do what she thought they should do. Um, and I don't know about for you, but when those types of things come up, it hooks into some part of my identity as
Yeah.
a teacher or as a learner. Thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that that's very well said. And I think that's very true. Is that if there's some sort of conflict or dissonance between what I thought I was able to do for them or what I thought I was able to provide to them, and yet the product or maybe the output doesn't really match that, yeah, that then conflicts with my identity and what I thought of, what I was doing. Yeah, 100%. That's well said.
Colleen, you wrote me a super thoughtful email when I first invited you, and you were talking about the kinds of this work you did already and how you work with some of your residents on it, which made me think about this kind of work being part of developing your identity as a clinician or as an educator. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the relationship between emotion and identity as you've experienced it.
Especially when we're recreating some of these experiences in the sim lab, you can appreciate sometimes when other people's bodies get tight, right? You can see in their body language when they feel discomfort or when you think that they feel discomfort, but you can ask about that. And I've found that to be really interesting in our debriefing, to be like, when this particular thing happened, when the family member came in and was really angry, I saw you get super tight, right? I saw your muscles tighten up. What was going on for you then? And being able to talk about what they were thinking and kind of helping them with kind of the idea of mental noting and what emotion was kind of underlying them gave a lot of insight to what they were able to do next, like, or what their actual steps were next. When we wrap up our debriefs, a lot of the time we will highlight that. Guys, when you're working the rest of this week or in this month, when your body feels that way, or you feel whatever happened today, when you feel it again, remember this sim. What was happening then? Like for me, when somebody comes to be like, oh, you know what? That person's looking for narcotics, and I feel that tightness. That's a signal to me about some of my implicit biases, because I'm not thinking about the implicit biases right then. I have to train myself to do that. But that's what I talk to my residents about. I'm like, if your body gets tight, there's a disconnect. Where is the disconnect? See if you can take that piece of information, take a quick look at it, and pull yourself back from it a little bit. That might change how you engage moving forward. It might make it so that you can move forward with less stressful emotion, like fear and anger.
Love that. All right. So we've talked a bit about judgment, standards behind it, and now we've been talking a bit about turbocharging all that with emotions. I want to just thank you both so much for joining us and sharing your journey, and I'll look forward to our next conversations.